Hey, it's a bit low. Just finished up Space Empire Solitaire. Now, one of the most remarkable things I find about this game, and I was definitely right, it is very similar to your Stellar Conquest. Same basic idea here. Spruced up in a way, not necessarily more playable because there are still some aspects to it. Like there's still a lot of bookkeeping. You could remove a good deal of that. It's different bookkeeping, but there still is a significant amount of the game. And that's one warning: if you don't like any bookkeeping, this isn't the game for you. You've got to spend your income each turn, which is a fair amount, although it could certainly be calculated without the spreadsheets or whatever they give you. But you also have to keep track of the technology on a per-ship basis. Of course, there is an option to have instantaneous technology upgrades as Stellar allows, and that would get rid of that piece of bookkeeping and make it somewhat more manageable, but you still, every 3 movements, you get to sit down and calculate out what your income is, which is pretty obvious on the board. It's not a complex procedure, and then spend your points. But the point numbers can be fairly high, so having it on paper is kind of nice, actually. All right. But yeah, that was the thing that struck me the most. The game that I played may not be anything like what your group or you decide to settle down and play, because the base game is very, very different. Everybody, even in the 4-player multiplayer, everybody's sitting in their own corner and has a lot of time to build up the force they want. But the goal of the game is to knock one player out, and you have to be the person to knock them out. You win by doing that. It's that simple. In the option I played, it's more of a longer game because you have to knock everybody out. And to do that, you really have to make sure that your diplomacy, etc., works out a little differently than it would in the base game. There are a number of other little configurations that you can make to the scenarios. A lot of different map configurations that are available, just page after page of these. I went with the random setup, where all the pieces were completely random, which means there's almost an infinite variety, but you have no control over it. And to some extent, no matter what, you have no control, because there's going to be an infinite variety of scenarios in terms of where the resources are. But by setting aside the corners the way it does, you end up with players having relatively balanced amounts of forces between them in each area, with easier stuff near them and harder stuff further away. The way I played it, they were right up in the ugly stuff right away, like the Doomsday Machines, and that could have a real random effect on the play. No question there, I enjoy that kind of thing, but I could see where people would rather have the stability of knowing I'm going to have a chance to actually play this game. I'm not just going to be doomed by my first exploration, which is what happened to the green player. There's other options I didn't play with, like the heavy terrain variant, which is when a counter danger or lost in space is flipped, you keep drawing, you put a new counter there until until either something permanent ends up there, or the player, or you run out of counters total and everything's been used. Then there's some solitaire scenarios, Doomsday Machine scenarios. I haven't even really looked at these, but you're basically fighting the Doomsday the machines, and that looks like it would be an interesting solitaire game. And then there's one against an alien empire, which again, is going to try, and they've expended 4 or 5 pages on solitaire games here. Oh, maybe more than that, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5.5 pages on solitaire games. And, that's a pretty good investment. And you end up with a lot of, conceivably interesting games that way, I'm sure. I didn't really try them, and I definitely didn't try them, and I didn't really look at them terribly closely. But if that's kind of your style, you get that added bonus in this. I'd rather play my solitaire games as the big multiplayer game. So to me, it's not that big a bonus, but I may end up trying them sometime. Overall, I think it does what it is trying to do very well. I don't think it's fair to compare it to Stellar Conquest, even though they're very similar concepts. I mean, it's fair to compare, but I don't think I can come up with, I like this better, or I like Stellar better. I think this would be less of a pain in the butt than Stellar is. And it also has a little bit more flavor in terms of different ship types, different technology tracks to research. Technology is harder to get in this, though. So, and it's more generally focused on, as the whole game is, on the combat side. Stellar Conquest is has a strong element of the economics. In this, all you really have for that is maybe the exploration bonus and then the terraforming, which certainly both are kind of available, or things like them are available in Stellar. In Stellar, though, you have industrial capacity that you're working on. You're working on the population itself. You're worried about, you know, automated tools, etc. So it goes much more into detail on that side of it, the economic side, the record keeping, the bookkeeping, and much less on the military side. Because of all that, and when you add things like planetary defense screens to Stellar Conquest, Stellar can't have a clear ending. You can't say, destroy everyone else. That'll win you the game, but that's a situation which may become impossible in some games. I'm not as, it's just a slightly different emphasis. It seems like the same kind of game, but it really doesn't play the same at all. Stellar can play out as something where you're charging forward and attacking an opponent to take them out of the game for that early bonus, but it very seldomly is quite as interesting, I think, tactically as this game is. This game was won, the game that I played, was won by the red player against the blue player making better tactical decisions of where to move his ships and how to use them, and then the strategic decisions of what to build, etc., factored into that fairly heavily. Blue had this far-flung territory that they couldn't defend, and red brought that home to them, and then was able to develop their own back area that kept, blue facing the red fleet near them, pinning them in, without really being able to either colonize or affect the red fleet. So yeah, I had a pretty good time with it, actually, and I haven't taken it apart because it's I'm planning on playing it a post game very shortly. Now, component-wise, the map's very sturdy, has a nice texture to it. These counters. So here's one gripe: is the setup. Flipping all these counters and placing them on the board is a really tedious task, and it's one that you don't have in most games. So your setup for this is going to be very heavy. There's a lot of hexes and a lot of counters that have to go in them. In terms of the actual counters, well, they're GMT standard, which is pretty good quality. I don't really like the color mix, mainly because the blue is kind of a little too pale for my taste. You got a player reference card for everyone, which has information on it. I do notice one thing, which appears, I think it's a misprint. This may actually just be on my files that I pulled down from Board Game Geek, as opposed to the actual files, or the actual sheets. Okay, so here's the thing. There's a much lesser production chart on the back of the actual GMT sheet. And the player aid that I pulled down from Board Game Geek to replace that is very good, but it does have a typo on it, I believe. Yeah, it has a typo on the cost of destroyers. They should be 9 rather than 6 that the Scout is. So each player is going to have a sheet of paper that's double-sided, and double-sided is kind of annoying because you have to, I don't know, flip it over, I guess. But it is kind of annoying in play to have to work on both sides of a sheet of paper. But you also have these reference, everybody's got one, there's one for each player card, which indicates all the costs, most of the special rules about things, and then all the effects of the different technology kind of summarized. And that's very helpful. I found that I didn't have to page through the rules looking for all these special cases that would otherwise have been really a nightmare. There were a couple of things where you do have to look something up. That's not too bad. So for example, with the Doomsday Machines, you have to look up the rule for them at least once, I guess. But most of it is pretty pretty well supported. The rule book itself, the rules weren't at all bad. They're actually fairly short at 16 pages, given, well, you've got the scenario book as well, which is pretty hefty. But given that the advanced rules start on about page 11, so you're looking at 10 pages of rules here. I think the game is more interesting with most of the advanced rules, just because it's giving you more options. The basic game gives you the limited number of options that maybe is closer to what Stellar gives you. But with the additional options of more ship types, some that I didn't even get into, you know? I mean, my playing, I didn't touch raiders, I didn't touch mines, I didn't get the heavier ships. People were playing with the idea of building mines. Blue started researching it, but it never really came out. So it's hard to tell, you know, just how everything interacts. And a lot of that's because of how close those two players started, and really everybody started. And that brings me back around full circle to the configurable nature of the game. You have the optional rules, which I think you want to play with once you feel comfortable with them. But then you have the scenarios, and you can start adding, you know, the options for creation of the map, the totally random map, for example, or these larger 2-player maps or smaller ones, different choices that people can take. For the 4-player scenarios and 3-player scenarios, really there's only 2 choices. Do you have a fixed map, or do you go with the random map? The random map is going to be much more likely to be an unbalanced situation. Not only because of what's found near you. Hey, I got wiped out on the first turn, man. But also perhaps by where you start. You know, what we saw in this game, it looked like red and blue were the 2 people most likely to be screwed in the game, just because they were close to each other. They would either have to devise some sort of agreement to split things, which had they done, red would have been really shafted because blue had a lot more territory, and they had good stuff near them in what would have been their territory, whereas red had almost nothing near them. And it actually did work out that way anyway. But the green and yellow players were positioned far enough away from each other that they at least would have had some chance to build a core empire and then play off what red and blue were doing to decide whether or not they went to war. Early in the game, sorry, I'm just chewing some of my flesh. The bases are fairly easy to build, and they're a tremendously powerful defensive position. Even with only 1 on your homeland, and unlike how I cheated, I think once you can build a base, you can pretty much defend your home planet for the early stages of the game. It's not until someone starts to really build the larger ships or the fighters that you have a real problem that you have to defend with more than just a base and 4 of your shipyards. We actually saw at the end of the game the number of shipyards being insufficient. Even Red couldn't build, especially with choices like fighters, which are cheap but effective enough that you actually want lots of them. Red didn't have enough shipyards to build all their fighters. And the option on the other side would be, use 3 of your shipyards to build a big ship. Well, the big ship was about, it costs about the same as the shipyard, as the fighters do, but it's nowhere near as effective. It's just got this humongous staying power, but really not that much more than 3 fighters would. So fighters are definitely a potent option, and I think probably I would aim for them again, which means I'll probably aim for the point defense as well as the way to try to counter them. Because, although fighters are a good way to counter fighters too. The other, there's an option that I didn't play with, which allowed, and it may be a good idea actually, trying to see where it was. It was an upgrade to the fight, to the, I don't remember where it is. Maybe it wasn't an option. Maybe I just screwed up by not playing with it. That you can't even build carriers until you, no, it's got to be an option. You can't build carriers until you faced like a heavy ship or something. So the game would have to go significantly into a further point. Somebody has to get to those big ships before you can start building the carriers. It almost feels to me like the carriers shouldn't be 1-point ships. I don't remember where that option is. I know I saw it. But yeah, game variants. There we go. Shipbuilding requirement variant. Players cannot even research the fighter technology until BC, BB, or DN from either side has been in combat with another player. Once this happens, all players can research fighters. You can't research cloaking until a destroyer or larger ship from either side has been in combat with another player. Once this happens, you can research cloaking. I think those make sense, and I wish I had played with them. But I left all those game variants out, the heavy terrain, the ship build requirements, the low maintenance, which says you would only pay half the maintenance value. I liked the high cost of maintenance that I was facing in the game, where it made it easier to catch back up because it's so expensive to maintain your ships, and I think that feels realistic to me with a Navy. The ship build requirement we looked at, Quick Start would be, Quick Start allows you to control your entire sort of system, basically the quadrant of the map that you own would be already colonized by you and allow you to start the game with big empires to begin with. Probably only makes sense if you're playing with the fixed map games. Anyway, overall, I think this thing was, definitely a good addition to the Space Empire games, and I would put it up in the very top, up with Stellar Conquest in terms of what I've seen. I've got a few more that are kind of less accessible games, things like Dark Stars, that I want to give a shot to, but I haven't gotten around to yet, and I got this much later, and I'm sorry for grabbing this one first. But this one's accessible in terms of purchase and in terms of the rules in a way that those are not. So I want to see if they match some need that I have to go beyond this, although this game certainly could be expanded. I think expanding it beyond one board, as one of the suggestions is, hey, get 2 boards and 2 full sets, just ends up being a bigger game of this. You'd have to start adding new technologies and all kind of additional things, which may well come out. I wouldn't be shocked if GMT put stuff in C3I, especially if this is very, very popular. Just, they like putting stuff out like that as added bonuses, keeping their games in better sales as well as getting the C3Is sold. Alright, so I hope you all enjoy it. I think it's a good game as long as you can cope with the small amount of record keeping that minimally is required. And I would actually suggest you want to go to the intended level. Alright.